Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Radical Recovery Summit. Robert Litman has a new book, The Breathable Body. He caught the eye of Oprah and is included in her Tune In to the Life You Want series on the art and science of breath. I am very happy to be here today with Robert Litman. He's author of a recent book, The Breathable Body, and a longtime teacher and breather and person who has helped a lot of different people with their health, with their breathing, with their mental health, physical health. What I'd like to do to start is to have you introduce yourself. How did you get into this? What is your interest in it? What are your main influences? Where are you at right now with what you're doing as well?
Yeah, thank you. I've been doing this for over 35 years, teaching breathing and movement. I started off in a bodywork movement program called the Doug and French Approach to Somatic Pattern Recognition, which was in the lineage of Dr. Ida Rolf. My wife at the time was a Rolfer and was fascinated with how, when I got around people who were really well aligned, how well I got aligned. And I thought, wow, I like this. But it even started before that, because on my first Rolfing session, after I walk away, oh my God, I actually have a body. I think I was pretty disconnected from having a body from my traumatic childhood. So I got fascinated. So I went to school, and the first part of that dynamic in body work is always to put your hands on people's rib cage very gently and follow their breathing. And I was like, oh my God, I don't need to go any further. I'm just fascinated to have somebody be inside of my breathing and to also be able to contact somebody at such a deep level by following their breathing with my hands and my awareness. I was just fascinated. So I practiced that for a while. And part of that training program, they asked me to study anatomy. And it was coincidental. It's just like, how life plays itself out in ways. It's like your next step shows up for you. When I was in school, I didn't really like anything but biology. And when I went to college, I studied marine biology for a semester, but I wasn't able to finish it because the school was so far away from my dorm and I didn't have a vehicle. But when they asked me to practice anatomy or to study anatomy, I grabbed at it. And I studied something with John Zahorik in Anatomicon, where you build the body out of clay. And I just became fascinated, and I started to become an anatomy teacher. I studied anatomy on my own, and I taught it in Massar School for many years. And at a particular point in that, I also became a continuum movement teacher, which is now called just Continuum Moving Inquiry for me, with study with Emily Conrad. And I was teaching in England, and a woman asked me what was on my wish list. And I told her I wanted to study the Buteyko breathing method. I really wanted to delve more deeply into breathing. And she asked me what that was going to cost. And I told her it was $15,000. And she wrote me a check, just right on the spot. So it was like these little breadcrumbs were laid out for me. Okay, first you're studying anatomy. Now you had to study movement. So you really know what the body's about. And now you're really going to learn about breathing and really what that takes. I've been teaching Buteyko since 2003, and then I became a certified breathing behavior analyst with Dr. Peter Litchfield and Sandra Riemer. And I've just been working privately and in groups ever since. And that accumulation of 35 years spurred the book. I had an editor who took a lot of my classes, and he kept saying to me, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. You need to write a book. And so I did. And he helped me write it, and he helped publish it. So that's what I'm doing now, continuing to work privately and offering classes and giving readings on my book and, information that comes from the book. And a lot of people have come back to me and found the book incredibly valuable. And my approach to breathing is not about techniques. It's really about, I'm interested in the breathing is our most essential biological process. We are not alive with it. There's no two breaths that are alike. We never know if we're going to get another breath. And it's a template for realizing that everything comes and goes. So there's nothing really worth trying to grab onto, because you just think that they don't last. My interest in breathing is not about breathing work. I don't particularly cotton to the word work, because it feels like, that's not what breath is about. For me, it's about what's my relationship with my breathing and my body? How do they move together? How is my awareness when I'm aware of the breath moving in and out and how my body is responding, and what that tells me about my inner state, the pattern of it, the movement of it, where it moves in my body. And as I develop that intimate relationship, I know what it needs to help self-regulate, and I know what I need from it to help me self-regulate. I feel like the issue is not about fixing my breathing, but by becoming intimate in a relationship with my breathing. And therefore, like any intimate relationship, we get to know each other over time. And that's the one I feel like breath is my teacher. And what I do is guide people to be invited into listening to their breath to see what it will teach them. And that's my approach. And most people like that because it's easier. People generally think, well, if I'm going to learn and do breath work, I'm considering, am I doing it right? Am I breathing right? Am I breathing wrong? And as soon as you get into the right or wrong paradigm around breath, it doesn't behave at all the way you want it to behave. It seizes up. It doesn't like to be judged. It likes the
Right.
freedom to move on its own in appropriate relationship to what you need.
Right. One of the statistics in your book is over 80% of people with anxiety have disordered breathing, some kind of non-optimal breathing. Can you talk a little bit about trauma and how people get in the situation where we're holding our breath, we're not breathing very efficiently?
Coming from a trauma background, there are a couple of questions in there. The biggest conversation in breathing right now that's been brought forward is that the nose is for breathing and the mouth is for eating, and you breathe through your mouth as often as you eat through your nose. And the simple way to speak to it is, right, it's an odd term, but it works, right? The simple way I talk about it is that if you get frightened, that's the breath you're going to move. And that breath immediately triggers the autonomic nervous system to go into fight or flight, to sympathetic, to get motivated for action or for freeze, right? So when a person is anxious and traumatized, they tend to breathe through their mouth throughout the day or occasionally throughout the day. And every time you do it on a regular basis, even a small breath, starts to say, what's going on? What's going on in the system here? And it moves the breath up into the chest. Because when we're in fight or flight, we need to move a lot of air up here really quickly. But when we rest and settle, we need to be moving air from down low. If we start to use our mouth for breathing at all, we start to move up into chest breathing. And once we start to move into chest breathing, breathing is happening in a smaller space than it's meant to happen to for regular life. And when it's in a smaller space, it starts to move much more quickly. That energy of the body moving breath more quickly then gets translated into, oh, I feel really anxious. I can't quite get enough breath. And you can't. You're trying to grab as much as you can, and you can't. Just too small a space. You're moving only from here. So when we say 80% of adults have anxiety, at some point during the day, most people do. But yes, generally it's people who use their mouth for breathing sometime during the day and repetitively over time that brings them into that dynamic of feeling anxious. I can't get enough big breath. I'm aware that how I want to speak to you is something that I teach my students, is that when we speak, the other rule of thumb from Pateco is that you pace yourself so you can continue to use your nose for breathing. When I speak, comes a point. Speak is audible breath. So I'm running out of breath at a certain point. So if I pace myself, then I close my mouth and I breathe through my nose to keep myself in that parasympathetic when I am talking. And that takes some practice. And I teach people to read aloud and use periods and commas or places where they go, oh, I need to pause here. Holding one's breath is a really interesting phenomenon. I'm writing another book right now, and the working title is 99 Ways We Hold Our Breath.
That's a great title.
And the reasons why. So
Right.
reasons why cover all the spectrum of our psychology and our emotional state. But the two ways that we hold our breath, one is the simple way that we can answer that question is, I don't breathe, which many people speak to. Oh, I'm not breathing. And there was an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about screen apnea, people who begin to open up their email and are holding their breath. And an expectation of something that actually may even be frightening to them. What's going to be in the email? So that they find themselves holding their breath. That's just one example. The other way that we hold our breath is that breath is being held in a smaller container. And this is what relates to trauma. Is our breathing, when it's allowed, is meant to really move fluidly. And that movement is also a signal to the parasympathetic that we're relaxing. But if we have extra tension, protection, been oppressed, been abused, and we're frightened, we tend to hold ourselves really tight and small, right? We don't want to be visible. We don't want to be seen. We don't want to be vulnerable. We keep it tight. Well, when you keep it tight, breath can't move. It's being held in a smaller container. And to open up that container opens up the vulnerability. That's a titrating phenomenon. That's why the intimate relationship with breathing, because if I can learn through my relationship with it, I can trust it, that even though I'm trying to move into that space that's being held, and I can feel that, and I'm connected to the felt sense of that, and that's my body, perhaps I can start to build some trust for that so that I can relax with that a little bit. And that's what's taken me those many years to go, okay. The third thing that came to me when I first started to do breathing practices and studying breathing was, this means me no harm. Of all the things in the world, this means me no harm. Can I learn to receive it, accept it, and have pleasure in my own breathing body? That was the start for me. And I need to have something that I can trust, that will never abandon me. That even if it's not behaving properly, it's still doing its job. It's doing what I have asked it to do.
I think it's a really important realization that our nervous system, our body, our whole mind body is not ever out to hurt us. There might be things that are difficult or, like you say, not working well, but it's not with the intent to harm us. It's with those kinds of things, it's with the intent to protect us.
Yes.
When we're working with the breath, that's something that we could begin to really know. And the same as working with different kinds of trauma responses and nervous system hypervigilance as well. It's not here to mess us up, it's here to try and help. So that's a really important part of the relationship that you're talking about, this intimacy.
Yes, it's always in our service. Even if we're hyperventilating or hypersensitive, hyper aware, it's like, yeah, I don't trust. But turn it here to the internal world. I can find some trust and also really get better bead on really what is disturbing me. Not the generalization, but what am I feeling right now? If I can start to feel my body, I can actually ask, what am I actually feeling? What are the sensations that I'm feeling? What are the emotions that may come up that, if I quiet down enough, can inform me so that I'm acting from my feelings, not from my thinking so much?
Right. This might be a good time for you to guide us through a little practice. Because I'm
Yeah,
sure everybody listening is like, how am I breathing? Am I breathing in my chest? Am I breathing in my mouth? Am I holding my breath? What's going on? Could you do a little awareness practice with us?
Yeah, I'll do something that has two parts to it. This is one piece that I picked up from sutras from 5,000 years ago. And the thing that I really like about it, when I started to play with it and see what they were speaking to, over our lifetime, our breathing pattern is developed based on our experience. All our breaths are ancestors of the breath that's arriving right now. And we have patterns that do provide that protection. So as we breathe in through our nose, we have very many ways of doing that. We can breathe hard, we can breathe soft, we may have facial resistance to allowing the air in. My nose is stuffed all the time. So this is the way we breathe in. But this sutra advises when you're breathing in, you think the syllable sa, S-A, and when you're breathing out, you think the syllable ha. And the functionality that I find when doing this is that it bypasses my pattern of breathing and it puts it back into the lungs charge of pulling the air through my nose to the amount of air that's really needed at the moment. The lungs know how much we need better than me knowing how much we need. So I'm suggesting that people sit, if they're sitting either cross-legged or sitting up on a chair, that they have their feet flat on the floor and that they're sitting not crouched over, but sort of even coming to the edge of the chair. And when you're inhaling, you think the syllable sa all the way through it. So one sa all the way through. And then when you think on the exhale, ha, you're actually letting the air leave on its own without your effort. The diaphragm and the elasticity of the lungs are squeezing the air out of the lungs. So you're breathing in with sa and out with ha. Doing a few of those just to see the difference. And if you want to, you can go back to the way you pull air in. And often what I suggest too is putting your hand on your chest and your belly. And when you breathe in yourself with pulling air in, when you pull the air in, you want to notice the tension in your chest. Does your chest relax or does it tighten? And if you try to get a really big breath in through your nose, what happens in your chest. And then, after you get a feel for that, go back to Sa and notice when you breathe in with Sa, what happens in your chest. And when you breathe in with Ha, breathe out with Ha, what are your chest and belly doing? I generally find that my chest relaxes when I think Sa. And if I wanted a bigger breath in right now, take a really big breath, I just think Sa longer. And I notice I keep expanding for it. Now, the other thing that's worth noting here, and this is where breath becomes the real teacher for us. When you're breathing out, you may notice you become less buoyant, because when you breathe in, you become buoyant. When you breathe out, so less buoyant. And when you're less buoyant, you're actually coming back to earth. Your body is downward, right? You're becoming a little more weighted, and you're aware of your body, and it's moving towards the earth, and you land on something. In the case of you and I right now, you land on the chair. So when you breathe out, you can feel your body sinking to the chair. You want to be aware of where you land in your feet, on your bottom, and even if your back is to it, just feeling what part of your body makes contact with what you're sitting on or standing on. I consider that support. The chair is supporting you. You're not falling down. When you breathe back in with Sa, you're keeping in your awareness your connection to support. And then breathing out again, letting your body come weighted and sink. And now noticing how you meet the support again. It may feel different, more area, less area. It won't be the same, but keeping the support in your awareness and breathing in with that, you want to see, does the exhale feel easier? Because you're not holding up. You've let some of the tensions go, right? So breath is inviting you to soften, let tension go, and trust there's something underneath you. So this is my practice. I do this all the time. If I'm walking in the street and I notice shoulders are up, nervous. Oh, where's my feet? Oh, there they are.
Right.
I think the breath is great in teaching us how and where we hold. So as we practice this, you'll start to notice certain places releasing. And every time you notice something release, you want to go, well, what's my exhale? What's my inhale going to be like without that little bit of tension?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's easier. And that the more you practice this, you'll find that oftentimes you're releasing the same tension in the same place all the time. So you get to know how you hold your tensions. You get to know your own tensional pattern. And then you have more access to it. It's quicker. Oh, I know where I usually hold. Let that piece go. So just continuing on here with all those instructions for the next half a dozen breaths. Breathe in with Sa, breathe out with Ha. Notice where you land on support. Breathe with support when you breathe in with Sa. So I'll be quiet and just breathe with you for the next 6 breaths. So how was that feeling?
It's lovely to let the body breathe. I think one of the effects of working with the Sa and the Ha is that it helps us to take our hands off of the breathing process and let the body do the breathing. So often when we get involved with noticing our breath, we move right into trying to control it, to try to do something with the breath. Speak a little bit about the trauma piece around that a lot of people are really uncomfortable paying attention to the breath, especially in the belly.
Yeah, well, the belly, I want to seed that conversation by one thing. When I talked about biology earlier, when we're paying attention to the breathing, we are turning our attention internally. That gives us insight into ourselves. We're following the breath with awareness. We're going insight. And so you're in a biological process, which is also can be neutral. And what I noticed when doing that is that I noticed my heart beating. So I was in tune with another biological process, which again takes me out of my thinking. And I have to be comfortable with feeling my heart beating because not everybody does like feeling their heartbeat. But in a trauma response, you're right. It's very difficult to say, well, I've been hiding from feeling myself. And now all of a sudden you're asking me to feel myself. So again, that's why I said earlier, you have to take it really slowly and just where can I allow myself just to feel a little bit? Because one thing we have to realize, I think, is that breath is a touch. So we have to also understand that I'm allowing myself to be touched, which is also difficult for trauma. When the air comes in, oh, I feel that. How do I feel that? Well, the receptors are touch receptors and pressure receptors. They're going, oh, my body's moving. How do I know that? The movement is touch. Can I tolerate just within my window of tolerance a little bit of touch? And if it gets to be too much, okay, let me look at the trees. Let me go out. But also, when we are allowing ourselves to have a little bit of touch, we're also coming more into the present moment. Because the present moment is ignited through our senses, through our seeing, through our hearing, through our smelling, through our tasting, and through touch. For me, in a relationship, who's married for 38 years, when I practiced body work, I loved getting it. The only person I could practice on was my wife. I couldn't touch anybody. I just couldn't. It was way too scary for me to have my hands on people. Over time, when I began to think, I came up with this for myself. How possibly can I touch anybody when I can't touch myself? When I don't know how it feels to be touched, how do I like being touched? So I asked myself, what kind of touch, like body, what kind of touch would you like? And often the breath accommodates that by being slower, kinder, softer. Like, oh, 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 soft, kind. Okay, I can do that. Yeah, I can touch other people. I can touch my wife in a much more gentle and kind way, waiting for the meeting, not for the idea I should be doing something. Learning how to touch myself through breath really helped me become more intimate with others through touch.
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought about it like that. And even when we touch by holding our own hands, there's something so powerful about that, that we can allow ourselves to enjoy our own warmth and support just by holding our own hands.
I agree. I really am very fond of my arms. And so I like to look at my arms. I like to use the sense of oh, wow, I think my arms are really pretty. And so I like to look at them. They immediately, if I pull up my sleeves, they go, oh, okay, here I am. I don't know. My arms bring me home to myself in some way.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. I value them and I touch them and I let myself touch my chest and my belly. And so if we go back to the belly, Alison Post wrote a beautiful book called Unwinding the Belly. And she talks about when she does a workshop, all hell breaks loose if you have people put their hands on their belly, right? Because the belly, we have so much, it's so corrupted. Our ideas of body is so corrupted. But the other piece is it's our gut brain. It's got more information in it than our spinal cord does, more nerve endings in our spinal cord. And so it's the seat of our feelings. Everything that's ever happened to us has been registered by our belly. So to get ourselves in there and to allow our belly to be touched, relaxed, to be met. And I have an exercise in the book about how we just kind of lay our hands on the belly when you can get there and just listen to your body breathe with your belly moving, just so the belly feels like it's not being invaded by your hands. And your hands are just listening and moving with. And at some point, the belly goes, oh, I trust the hands. And then the hands can say, well, let me help you a little bit, belly. Let me kind of just move gently to help you soften a little bit here. It's really kind of basically based on Qigong, not Qigong, Qinit Song. So unwinding the belly and allowing yourself to feel through your belly, that's really hard. But it's so necessary because then when we're out in the world, we feel our gut response. We know how to behave a little better also. Not better, but more appropriately, more in resonance with what we really feel. It's a better way to say that. Yeah.
I'd like to come back to this whole relationship with the breath and the intimacy around touch and the breath. But I'd
Sure.
like to get into a couple of mechanical things first. When we talk about the oxygen and the CO2,
Yes.
can you talk about some of the myths? Like we have this myth that we need to be breathing in deep and full, and then how does it actually work? I hear so much the last several years about the exhalation and the CO2 are such a vehicle for transporting oxygen.
Yes. Facilitating the transport of oxygen. The old way of like taking, yes, the body really relaxes, but it doesn't give you any information. It just gives you a moment. And so mouth breathing in that case is a dissipation of intensity. So there are a lot of indigenous practices that do a lot of got to dissipate the intensity. But if I want to keep the cycle of information going in my body, nose breathing completes that circuit. So in the body, just like in the atmosphere, we have three primary gases: oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. And we see from climate change, as the carbon dioxide gets out of range, it changes the climate. Well, it's the same thing inside. We have three gases moving in, respiratory gases: the oxygen, the nitrogen, and the carbon dioxide. We're breathing in them and we're giving some of them out. They need to be in proper ratio for the body to distribute the oxygen. So with people with no lung disease at all and can get enough oxygen, fully saturated in their blood, the issue then becomes, can that oxygen that lands on the hemoglobin inside the red blood cells that's traveling throughout the 60 to 100,000 miles of the body be available to leave the blood, to go into the cells of the body where it's used to manufacture the energy that runs our bodies, the adenosine triphosphate. For that to happen, the blood pH needs to be balanced. It's a very fine balance. Like stomach acid could be anywhere from 5 to 2 on the acid scale, which is 1,000 times greater or less acidic in any particular day. But blood oxygen, blood plasma needs to be 7.35 to 7.45. So it has to stay in a very small tolerance. Otherwise, if it's too alkaline, then the oxygen will not move off the hemoglobin to move to the cells, and the cells are hungry for oxygen. So rather than breathing aerobically, where they make 38 molecules of energy for every molecule of oxygen, they only make 8. And they're making lactic acid as a byproduct instead of carbon dioxide and water. So what keeps that pH balanced are buffers in the blood, bicarbonate and carbonic acid. When we breathe out too much, we lose the ability to make the buffer carbonic acid. So the blood gets too alkaline, and then the oxygen doesn't move off the cells. So too much oxygen, too much mouth breathing, too much big breathing gives off too much carbon dioxide. The body starts to not be able to distribute oxygen. The common way to recognize the truth of it is the folk remedy of when somebody's about to faint from breathing too much because they're frightened, they breathe into a paper bag, or they put their hands up here. Well, what are they breathing when they breathe into a paper bag? They're breathing back their own carbon dioxide. And so when they do that, then oxygen to the brain, which has been stifled for a while, starts to come back in line, and they come awake again, so they're not going to faint. Carbon dioxide regulates the distribution of the oxygen from the blood to the cells. So the problem comes in for overbreathing, for holding your breath, is that we breathe too fast or too much out of your mouth. And the body has a set point. It gets a little complicated, but it starts to read the carbon dioxide levels. And it starts to see, oh, we're not keeping the normal amount. So we're going to adjust the respiratory set point to the lower level of carbon dioxide so we can keep the breathing regular, even though it may be fast. So what happens, like this is you go to a lecture, right? And you sit down and you relax. Then all of a sudden you start to yawn. So the body's relaxing. When it's relaxing and you're not breathing as much, carbon dioxide levels are rising. So then you yawn. Why? To bring that carbon dioxide level down to what your body is normally used to. So the idea in the breathing practices now with the carbon dioxide is to build the carbon dioxide tolerance. So by nose breathing and continuing to breathe quietly with Saha, your body gets adjusted to the more carbon dioxide, to the regular, and it starts to raise the amount. So lengthening the exhale gives the body a chance to continue to contain, even though it seems counterintuitive. I'm breathing out more if I lengthen my exhale. You're not breathing as much, so the carbon dioxide levels are rising. So this is why the emphasis on the exhale, to continue to harvest carbon dioxide.
Hmm. So you said earlier that people who breathe through their mouth breathe more shallow and faster.
Generally, yeah, definitely breathe more shallow. Definitely, yeah. And they're giving off carbon dioxide all the time.
Right. So I know the nose is very important. Nose breathing is very important. I hadn't realized, though, that there's a connection between breathing through the mouth and a faster or a more shallow breath. So just by stopping that and breathing more through the nostrils would be enough to help people slow their breathing in a kind of a natural way?
A couple of things. One is when we breathe out through our nose, the body is always releasing the amount of carbon dioxide that needs to be released, just to keep it balanced. 2/3 of the load of carbon dioxide that gets released on your exhale through the nose stays in your sinuses and your nostrils. So when you breathe back through your nose, you're breathing back your own carbon dioxide to keep a good level going, right?
Fascinating.
So that's the answer to that. So shallow breathing, you're always gasping. Shallow breathers are, and you can hear it when they're talking. Yeah, they run out of air quicker, and there's a lot of gasping and a lot of sighing. So that shallow breathing does not allow the alveoli, which are the little air sacs, to inflate. So they stay kind of small. So when you reinflate them. So it's a sign that the body's been stressed for a long time. And so the questions then come, what's stressing me? What's overwhelming me? Why am I always sighing? What's going on internally that's hard for me to manage? What are the stresses that are hard for me to manage? Another way to really validate it for yourself is to, again, and it's really great with that, to use your hands as gently as you can. You put them on your chest and your belly and you breathe with Saha. You feel the movement and then you open your mouth to breathe and you notice where it goes right away. You're moving upward. So you're starting to move the breath this way. And if you just keep your nose breathing, then you start to move down. I mean, there are other pieces, and I could put them in. The other pieces that are really important in posture for breathing is that, there's a lot of conversation around it now, and not everybody can do it, but the tongue needs to be at the roof of the mouth.
You mean the tip of the tongue rolled back or just the top?
Yeah, it's a good conversation. Let's say the teeth are here.
Mm-hmm.
They're right behind the upper teeth, and it is meant to curl. But not everybody can do that. So if you can get it at least here. So there's a couple of things that happen. This is my tongue, and my tongue is attached to my hyoid, which is also attached to my epiglottis. And the epiglottis is a piece of cartilage that flops down over the airway when you're eating. So when the tongue is at the bottom of the mouth, that piece of cartilage is kind of low and it blocks the airway. You lift the tongue, then the airway opens. So you get more space in the airway, right? Also, from a Taoist perspective, we live in a microcosmic circuit. The air comes in, comes up our spine, goes down our front, and completes a circuit through the body. The tongue marries the energy from the sky and the earth and the upper palate and continues that microcosmic circuit. You drop the tongue down, you can almost automatically, and maybe I'm oversensitive to it, you feel the disconnect. You put the tongue up there, it's almost like an Avatar movie. Grab the horse's tail, you're connected. You put the tongue up there,
Right.
oh, whoa, I feel connected. So the tongue at the roof of the mouth, and what happens is the lips are lightly sealed. You're not pressing. So I like to teach people to lick their lips and feel the tension of the water. And that's enough. And your teeth are just a little bit apart. So that's what goes on here to help your breathing. And the eyes, the focal gaze, high focal gaze, especially the screen, also narrows the breath. So if you can keep a peripheral, even when you're looking at the screen, breathing becomes easier. So those are a few of the postures.
Not narrowing in on the screen, you have a wider perspective.
Yeah, because you can feel, if you narrow in on the screen, really get intense on the screen, just feel your breathing. And then if you just kind of, over here, it changes. So there are the postural things, mechanical things that you can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the sitting so you're not collapsing your diaphragm. And anytime you bend over and push your chest into your belly, you're compressing the diaphragm and you can't let the diaphragm move on its own. A lot of people say they don't feel their diaphragm moving, or they don't know if their diaphragm is moving. And it's not about belly breathing. That's an exaggeration of putting your belly out, but allowing the movement of the diaphragm to come down and distend the belly because it's pushing some of the organs. So,
Mm-hmm. So the ideal breath, and I know there's a lot of variation in that, but if people were going to go, I have a sense that my breathing could be better. How would I know when it's getting more optimal? Is it a certain number of breaths? Is it just interested as well as in the continuity of the breath? When people are holding their breath because of a habit of tension, either that small space there or stopping the breath, is continuity of the breath important as well?
yeah. When I hear the word continuity, I think about flow.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm scared,
Right.
that would be a signal. So like, what is my breath doing? Is it even or is it jagged? That tells me something about my state. Oh, okay. Is there something to be, you can ask yourself questions. Is there something to be frightened about or not? Or you can refer to, and that's why I like Saha so much. Can I start to regulate myself by letting my lungs do the breathing, which opens up the flow and the continuity? And that signal, and it also emotionally tells me, oh, I'm settling down some. And that's the point about coming to gravity, using gravity to pull the body down and letting the body support. I am actually settling myself internally, a really physical layering and settling down. And when I have the physical settling down, then my breath settles down also. And hopefully the mental settles down. The interesting thing about breath, you can ask it to do things for you. You can say, well, can you breathe? Can you show me the breath of kindness? Can you breathe with kindness? Breathing with. That's another part of my book I don't like breathing into because it objectifies the thing that you're trying to do. But can I breathe with kindness? What happens? It gets lighter and gentler, doesn't it? Immediately. Can I breathe with, and this is the most optimal breath ever, because the body's going to breathe itself completely. Love. Can I breathe with love? Love for myself, love for those I love for the world, love for beauty. And when that love comes in your body naturally, breath is like a cloud. It's like lace. Because most of the time we're breathing with fear.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So optimal is about flow. And the key word in the practice is to learn to allow your body to breathe. The word allow. We don't want to control it. And I think one of the best ways to allow is to adopt an attitude of receptivity. How do I receive my breathing? Just to imagine yourself in a receptive state.
You want to guide us on a little practice of that?
Yeah, sure. So in these postures that I've talked about, sitting, mouth and tongue and eyes, just start to follow the breath in and out with Sa and Hum. 2 or 3 of those breaths. And ask yourself, how do I receive my breathing? Can I put myself in a receptive state? No doing, no actions. I'm just here, hands open, to receive the sacred gift of breath that powers my life. That I know no 2 breaths are alike, and each time I breathe in, I am reborn. I never know if I'm going to get another breath after the last one. It's my heart's desire that calls it forth. And if it does, can I receive what's being called for? And can I give back to what receives it from me? And just notice any limitation, any fear. Just breathe with it. If something comes into your awareness, a thought, an image, a sensation. Just note it, keep it in your awareness, breathe with it. When you breathe with it, you give the breath of life to what has come into appearance. And trusting that when you breathe out, that appearance will fade. And you'll move into something when it's palpable, when it's visible and possible, the vastness of the emptiness, waiting for the next breath to come in. Be curious. What do you learn? What do you discover if you just sit in receptivity? And one of the functions of receptivity is time. And so when you're receptive, notice first and foremost how the rate of your breathing changes.
Mm-hmm.
The easiest way to slow down. Receive, feel, love, honor.
I love the way you brought in love. Partly because when we're feeling that, the fear disappears and moves to the background. And when we have that, our whole nervous system, our whole mind body settles. We feel safe. We feel like we have some openness. We can breathe. And this relationship that we have with our breath, one of the things that was happening when I was doing that was I was just aware that I don't have to breathe. I'm just allowing the breath. And I don't have to take care of that. That's not something I have to do. And as the body softens and the mind gets into that flow with the ha and sa, then it naturally happens. Things ease, they become more nourishing. The breath becomes more nourishing.
That's a beautiful word. I mean, breath is meant to be nourishing.
Literally, it nourishes ourselves.
It is primary. Nothing comes before that. It is the primary nourishment. That's why I find the work, I tend to categorize myself as a utilitarian person. And so taking on this practice is what could be more utilitarian than receiving your own breathing?
Mm-hmm. Very practical.
Very practical. Very practical.
And I like it that it's something everybody can do. You know, in our society, we tend to be pretty aggressive with ourselves, including with our breath. And so to take that step back and really allow it to receive it instead of making it do something.
Yeah. When you receive it and you're receiving yourself and the gift that you're receiving and you're intimate with it, you're also connected.
Yes.
And that's the other thing that we all want so much is to feel connected. So in those moments of feeling isolated and alone and scared, no, I have that connection. I at least have that connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think it offers amazing gifts to us.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And I'm interested in the asking the breath as well, and that whole conversation that we can open up to. But I'm also interested in your book, you talked about asthma, a lot of other physical things that we think about as physical. Although with asthma, it's very clear that it's not just the physical body. Do you want to talk a little bit? If somebody has asthma or some kind of problem breathing, how would a good course be to work with that?
Yeah, I just want to say, to add on to the piece you said earlier about our body, when we receive it, our body's just breathing. And why it's able to just breathe is because when we are in that space where we're just allowing, the chemistry balances. And then the body is running on its chemistry appropriately. I have to think about the chemistry either.
Right. The body will do that on its own.
It's all coming into harmony, right? Asthma, it starts off with debunking the idea that something's wrong with me because I have asthma. Moderate to severe asthmatics tend to breathe 2 to 3 times faster than the average, which is somewhere between 12 and a couple of different standards. Yoga is 4 to 6 breaths per minute, which is now being called resonant frequency breathing, where it brings the heart and the breathing together. In Buteyko, we try to limit the breathing to 12 breaths per minute, which is 1 breath every 6 seconds. Western medicine says 18 breaths per minute, but asthmatics can breathe 20 to 30 times a minute. That's what Dr. Buteyko called hidden hyperventilation. So it's not somebody who's, but they're breathing so fast that they really are hyperventilating. So they're giving off so much carbon dioxide. Other function, besides regulating the distribution of oxygen, is also a vaso and bronchial dilator. So as you continue to breathe faster and through your mouth, the airways are constricting. And that's a response, according to Dr. Buteyko, to the breathing to stop you from releasing so much carbon dioxide.
Ah.
He thinks it's a defense mechanism.
Right.
But most asthmatics do when they get to this point, they try to breathe more.
Mm-hmm.
I can't get enough air. I can't get enough air. So in the Buteyko world, in science, when we slow the breathing down, then that carbon dioxide can open up the airway. So in my work with asthma, it's asthmatic people who are asthmatic. It's trying to develop trust again in breathing, because you also got to know, and this is, if we go to love, we have to go to death.
Right.
And so when you can't, an asthmatic, being one myself, I know when all I have to do is have one breath that tells me I'm heading towards asthma, death.
Right.
It's right there. So the fear comes up really quickly. So the practice of Buteyko and learning how not to be fearful without having to take, let's say it this way. When I have the asthma, to trust that if I go the other direction, slow down and not be afraid that I'm not taking bigger breaths, and maybe even using some breath holds to build the carbon dioxide up in that moment. And then my body can settle down and open up its airways. And over practice, when that chemistry, because you're slowing your breathing and you're coming back into normal, rebalances itself, then the incidence of asthma, you're less likely to be subject to your triggers. When your chemistry is low and you're overbreathing, you're more subject to it. Your immune system's weakened and you're more subject to your trigger. So what people find when they do this method is they go, oh yeah, that used to trigger me. It doesn't trigger me anymore. In the best case scenario. And that's been my experience of teaching it for 20 years. I've not had one asthmatic who hasn't found benefit from slowing their breathing down and learning how to breathe quietly and with love and receptivity.
When you're thinking about 12 breaths per minute, we're talking maybe 2 seconds on the inhale, 3 on the exhale, something like that?
Mm-hmm. And what happens, how people drop down to below that, when the balance of the chemistry is balanced, there's a natural and the body is soft and easy. There's a pause between the exhale and the next inhale. So breath gets lengthened, not by continuing to make the exhale longer, but by resting at the end of the exhale to let it complete itself on its own until the stimulus comes from the chemistry that says, now an next breath. So if people can have a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pause between the exhale and the inhale, depending on how relaxed they are. And people out who are listening to this who have done yoga, because when I did yoga in the 1960s with Swami Satchidananda, he said one thing. He said, we're only doing yoga to take the tension out of the body, to relax the mind. So when you do yoga, when I did yoga, and I hear this all the time, when I finish my yoga and I'm in that lying down Shavasana process, people say, I don't even know if I'm breathing. No, you're not. You've taken so much tension out of the body that the demand for oxygen is really low. It's tension that drives the demand for oxygen, because tension is muscle activity. Muscle activity needs energy. Energy needs more oxygen. So you're going to breathe more when you're tense. The more relaxed you are, the less you need to breathe. So that was Dr. Buteyko's final cue. He said, what you really need to do is just relax. Well, relax is a really tough word to understand, but that's why I like, can you settle? And can you rest in that settled place? And when you do rest in the settled place, you are relaxed. Rather than being a somatic person, those words like settled is a process. Relaxation is like relax, no, it doesn't work that way. You have to enter into a process to breathe there. Well, you can't relax if you're not settled, and you can't relax if you're not resting. I like this idea of letting the exhale take me down to support, because those of us who have been traumatized, where was the support? There was no support. So the earth's gift is, gravity's gift is, I am inviting you here. receive the gift of the ground, yield and surrender to the gift, because nobody else can occupy this space except you. This is where you belong. You belong to nowhere else other than this ecological phenomenon of walking on the earth. You don't have to belong to your work. You don't have to belong to a partner. You belong to yourself here now. And breathing teaches us how to yield to that.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Very, very soothing for a traumatic person.
Yes.
Speaking from experience.
Yeah. Well, and I like that there are ways. I know that when it's uncomfortable for someone to attune to their breath, that there are ways that we can ease into that and that we can become comfortable enough that then the breath can start to do that work of feeling safer and allowing that gift of the breath.
Well, from my movement practice with Emily Conrad, who created the practice of continuum, she was fond of saying, movement is not something we do, movement is what we are. So for people who are frightened by their breathing, I say, don't pay attention to your breathing. Pay attention to movement. Feel the movement. That's all. Feel the touch, feel the movement.
Right.
Your body's in movement. It's always moving.
Mm-hmm.
And you can always be aware of movement. You don't have to worry. Am I moving right or wrong? No, you can't answer that dynamic. I'm just moving. Where do I feel movement? Oh, that's a first order experience. It's not a mental. It's not an abstract. It's a first order experience of your nervous system sensing its movement.
Mm-hmm.
You're alive. You're moving.
So as we're getting towards the end here, and I'll mention your book, The Breathable Body, and I'll put some links on here. It's such a good book and so thorough. So for the geek in me that loves all of the science, there's lots of science in there, but it's also a very deep practice of attuning and being friendly with ourselves and being with ourselves. So I really appreciate that about your work as well.
Yeah, thank you. Those explorations come from my continuum practice. How do I make friends with my body in these gentle ways so that when I do breathe, I think, oh yeah, there's that part of my body in movement now. I become more receptive because I'm familiar with my body and how it moves. Those exercises or explorations are designed because they have an impact on your breathing. And so the more comfortable you are with them, the easier the breathing's going to be.
So is there anything that you'd like to leave with people? Any last words?
Breath delivers your spirit. It's your spirit. It's a spiritual practice to be in touch with your breathing. Without your breath, there's no animation for your spirit in this time around. And so be alive. No two breaths are ever alike, so you don't have to worry. You can just keep being interested and curious. Everything comes and goes, so you don't have to hold on and be attached too intensely. And you never know if you're going to get another one. So please, please, please honor the one you get.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us. And it's a delightful conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Lynn.
This is Lynn Fraser. Join us for the 2024 Radical Recovery Summit, January 12th to 21st. RadicalRecoverySummit.com.